Welcome to Arena Radio, the battlefield of ideas. My name is Chris Pillier with lanternsofliberty.us and the battlefieldofideas.com. I wanted to thank you for joining me today. There's been a lot of havoc going on in the nation. We got Ferguson blowing up in Missouri with the Brown situation, right? No pun intended. Because that's obviously where this is all going, is down to race, right? So we got complete lawlessness going on in Ferguson. We got complete lawlessness going on the border. And quite honestly, we have complete lawlessness going on in Washington, D.C. So one of the things that I wanted to do today, and obviously everybody's talking about immigration and all the lawlessness going on with the president. And I thought that, you know, I could sit here and maybe talk about all that and go through all the in particulars and pretty much echo everything else everybody else is saying, because I think it's all been said. But as I commented on my last podcast, which was about, is the American people stupid? What I try to basically say is, if you're not paying attention, then yeah, you do lack some intelligence there. So if you're not paying attention, it's because there's so much going on. Now, if you're watching this, obviously you are looking for a different perspective. You're investing in your knowledge, and you may not necessarily agree with everything I say, but you're not doing something else that's, you know, brain freeze. So there is a group of people, or a majority of people in the United States, that aren't paying attention and are simply pulling the levers for these people that are in power now, that are enacting an utter lawlessness. And so instead of talking about all this static that's going on, I wanted to kind of dig down into the more of the esoteric or the philosophical, or maybe more or less down to the roots of the problem. And granted, first of all, I'm not going to be able to, here on Google, in a little video podcast, be able to unveil and unravel all the problems that the nation has. But I think I can kind of maybe open the door a little bit to take a peek at what is one of the major fundamental problems in our country. And there's several, but I think it all stems down to one. And, you know, I've had many discussions with people recently, and we've talked obviously about the Constitution. We talk about faith. We talk about God. We talk about simple things like the news, what's going on in everyday life. And one of the interesting conversations that I had actually yesterday evening with my friend Trey Roberts is we were talking about how the internet, and actually it was another friend, Rob Goday, how the internet has more or less changed everything. And much like other free market principles or free market avenues like the internet, absolute truth bleeds through. Righteousness breeds through. So I think it's important for us to kind of step back when we see all this havoc going on in the news and agitation taking place by the people in power, and take a look at some simple principles. So what is going wrong with the United States? What's going on wrong in America? Well, lawlessness, I think I mentioned that, and I think we need to explore what lawlessness is and what that means, because it is a kind of a broad topic, because we could talk about natural law, we could talk about civil law or criminal law, so we can kind of break that down. So as we try to open the door here to take a peek at some of the fundamental problem, let's take that into consideration, that when I say laws or lawlessness, I'm speaking of amongst a broad band of topics. So what I want to do first is I want to simply define it. And a way I want to define it is I want to use Frederick Bastiat. If y'all not familiar with Frederick Bastiat, I would recommend that you buy his book called The Law. It is a fabulous read. It actually may be better to get the audiobook. I enjoy audiobooks when we deal with a topic that's very esoteric or philosophical, because it's very often that you kind of get a little, you're trying to focus on the philosophical and you kind of get lost in it. So the audiobooks, what they provide is the ability, obviously, to go back and replay it, and you're hearing somebody speak to you. And we all, I think, work better audio in an audio fashion rather than reading. I mean, we watch Google videos and YouTube and all these different things, and we that stimuli kind of keeps us in line with learning that way. So I want to read Bastiat here. Bear with me here. I want to put this on. Okay, so he's got a section in his book called "What is the Law?" It's just a couple of paragraphs, and I want to read it. It says, "What then is law? It is the collective organization of the individual rights to lawful defense. Each of us has a natural right from God to defend his person, his liberty, and his property. That is what we own. It's in our person, right? These are the three basic requirements of life, and the preservation of any one of them is completely dependent upon the preservation of the other two. For what are our faculties but the extension of our individuality?" So he's speaking to, if we look at our property is an extension of us, right? In other words, we work, we get money. That money is in exchange for our labor, which is our blood, sweat, and tears, right? And when we get that money, we purchase property. And that property becomes an extension of ourselves. That's why when we work for something and we sacrifice for something and we attain something that's valuable to us, that we want, right, and acquire, that we take care of it because it is a part of us. So that's what Bastiat's speaking to here. If every person has the right to defend, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, then it follows that a group of men have the right to organize and support a common force to protect these rights constantly. So we ought to have a right to collect ourselves together and form a government to protect our property rights. Thus, the principle of collective right, its reason for existing, its lawfulness, is based on individual right, and the common force that protects this collective right cannot logically have any other purpose or any other mission than for which it acts as a substitute. Thus, since an individual cannot lawfully use force against the person, liberty, or property of another individual, then the common force, for that same reason, cannot lawfully be used to destroy person, liberty, or property of the individual groups. So in the same breath, he's saying that we can't use that collective to take away the rights of the individual because it'll undermine that organism of lawfulness. And it is an organism. It requires certain organs in order to make that work. And this is what the libertarians and the conservatives often debate about, conservatives being constitutional conservatives. The rule of law. It's extremely important to have a rule of law. So we go further here, just two more paragraphs. Such a perversion of force would be, in both cases, contrary to our premise. Force has been given to us to defend our own individual rights. Who will dare to say that force has been given to us to destroy the equal rights of our brothers? Since no individual acting separately can lawfully use force to destroy the rights of others, does it not logically follow that the same principle also applies to the common force that is nothing more than the organized combination of the individual forces? If this is true, then nothing can be more evident than this. The law is the organization of the natural right of lawful defense. Let me read that again. The law is the organization of the natural right of lawful defense. So the government is simply the organization of our natural rights. and the lawful defense of them. So when a person or a group of people, whether it's the government or whatever, interferes with that organization, then they are in a way acting unlawful, as well as a Brit, or they're an affront to the law, to the rights of the individuals that make up that organization. And notice that he focuses on the individual aspect of it, because that's really, really important. Last sentence here or two. Let's see. And this common force is to do only what the individual forces have a natural and lawful right to do, to protect persons, liberties, and properties, to maintain the right of each other, and to cause justice to reign over all of us. So lawfulness, right, and lawlessness. That's basically the dialectic here. And when we see what's going on in Ferguson, if we bring it down to what's actually taking place now in the country, if we look at what's going on in Ferguson, a lawful organization of individuals wanting to focus on Ferguson would simply say, okay, let's focus on the law and the natural rights of all of those involved. That would include the people that own property in Ferguson. That would also include the people that are on either side of the discussion here, whether it's Wilson or Brown. Brown not being here, but the people that represent him in his cause. They both have rights, and they have equal rights. And they're innocent until proven guilty, specifically Wilson. And what's happening over there is that lawlessness is unfolding, because people are, first of all, a lot of them are not very educated on what that means, which is why this conversation is so very important for us to have with all the people that we know. And when we have a discussion about Ferguson, we must talk about lawfulness. We must talk about why it is important for us to protect the rights of Wilson in his fair trial, regardless of our opinions or our feelings or what we've witnessed in the past in other lawful or unlawful situations. That is why this is so important. So what we see in Ferguson is a microcosm of the problem. Now, this is obviously a very inflamed situation. We have people going down there and agitating and promoting lawlessness. So I'm trying to make the common thread here so we can all see that the problem is lawlessness. It's a much more broader issue than that, but we can kind of focus in there. And then we have what's going on the border. And, our government, the way it is organized, is that it separates power in order to prevent tyranny. And we have different parts of that organization, being under Article 1, the legislative, Article 2, the executive, and Article 3, the judiciary. And they're the most powerful in that order. There's a reason why Article 1 is the legislative. And there's a reason why Article 2 is the executive, because the power lies in the hands of the people. And the people that represent us utilize the power that we have loaned them to represent us. So when we hear all the talking heads talking about this and that, about amnesty and how it is lawless, by more or less allowing the president, because that's what we're doing, allowing the president to legislate from the executive branch. In other words, he is taking power from Article 1 and applying it in Article 2. He's breaking the law. And there's a lot of static about whether or not he's actually truly making a law. The fact of the matter is, in Article 1, Section 8, it says that the naturalization functions are in the Congress, not in the executive branch. So he has no power. And for people to try to defend the fact that it's been done in the past doesn't make it right now. It only makes it more dangerous. Because lawlessness begets lawlessness. It brings about more of it. So to my liberal friends that want to say, well, Bush did it, well, Reagan did it, Nixon did it, or whatever. I don't know if Nixon actually did anything with amnesty, but bear with me. You say that, but you're ignoring the rule of law. We are a nation of laws, and for a reason, as I've discussed. Because once lawlessness occurs, even on the minute level, that is an affront to our rights as individuals. So as you support the president, Mr. Liberal, Mr. Democrat, Mr. Progressive, as the president does unlawful things, he is, in a sense, attacking your individual rights, regardless whether or not you appreciate that or not, or would you want him to break that law. Because guess what? He's setting the precedent for the next president to break the law. And then you'll be very upset when someone like Jeb Bush, God forsaken, gets into the presidency and decides that he's going to use the precedent with a C, to break laws. Then you'll be upset. There is a reason why there's this back and forth, Republican-Democrat, arguments all the time. And people all of a sudden, through a Democratic president, as they're a Democrat, they don't pay attention as much. Because they're not caring, because they're trusting these people involved in their government, since simply they pulled the lever for these people, and they expect them to represent them, and they're not holding them accountable. And they're not acting as they are supposed to under a federalist republic. They're acting as if they're in a democracy, big D democracy. They're acting despotically in a compassionate way for the will of the people, as Barack Obama said in his state last night, state of address, or whatever you call it. Despots never do anything that they think is going to hurt the people overall, the collective, right? Yes, it's inflammatory to say despot or despotic. It's intended to be, but it is defined by Montesquieu. If you want to read Montesquieu, he talks about what despotism is, soft despotism, soft tyranny if you want to call it, that when you have an executive or a body of magistrates that executes the law and legislates the law, that you have tyranny. It doesn't matter how large or how small the action. And Bastiat, coming after Montesquieu, explains that. So what I want to do, I want to take a little small break here, and when we come back, I'm going to go into a little more about the lawlessness, but then I want to talk about value. Because we've talked a lot about value on the Lanterns of Liberty Facebook forum. If you're watching this, and if you go to the Google Hangouts area, there's a link that I posted there. If you're not on the Lanterns of Liberty forum, you need to get involved. There's a lot of very great people there that are very intelligent and share a lot of very great ideas. And it's the battlefield of ideas. So we're going to discuss some more about lawlessness, the Constitution, as well as value, because I think value is really going to kind of open your eyes when you see the principles of value and what we mean there. So we'll be right back.
And the sacrifice zones of the pollution-based economy have to become the sacred zones in the new clean and green economy. Those communities that were locked out of the pollution-based economy and pushed down by the pollution-based economy need to be lifted up in the clean and green economy. Well, guess what? Renewable energy. Guess what? Solar industry. Guess what? Wind industry. They now own and control 80% of the renewable energy resources. No more broken treaties. No more broken treaties. Give them the wealth. Give them the wealth. Give them the dignity. Give them the respect that they deserve. No justice on stolen land. We owe them a debt.
If you buy into that, all of a sudden, it's not about solar energy. It's more about giving the wealth to the people that we bully. It's about solving the problems of racism, of sexism, of religious intolerance, of war, of gross economic inequality. Understand? This is all Marxism. It's polemics. He talks about holding them down, and we need to bring them up. And he uses it in the context of the environment. It's a false dialectic. He's bringing you to, this man was the green czar in the White House under Barack Obama. Valerie Jarrett talked this guy up big time. This guy was set to do research and make policy so that Barack Obama could implement the plan. If you went to this conference, you probably were going there because of the green economy and green opportunity and all this stuff. And then you listen to him speak, and all of a sudden, it's all about the oppression of Indians and how we pushed them off their land. So if you didn't get that, I don't know what to tell you.
Arena Radio.
Check out Arena Radio on lanternsofliberty.us. Welcome back to Arena Radio, the Battlefield of Ideas. My name is Chris Pilier with lanternsofliberty.us and the battlefieldofideas.com. Be sure to check out lanternsofliberty.us. There's a lot of valuable information there. You can catch some of my podcasts. I do these Google Hangouts because I find they're a little more engaging, bring people on, still work out some bugs there, but video quality isn't quite as good as the podcast, but I find that it can offer a different angle, and you can not just hear me speak to myself. So wanted to first of all mention we wrote a book. I say we. I got Trey Roberts here, and we wrote a book called The Machine: The Progression of Secular Socialism, and you can find it on Amazon. Just you can Google my name, or actually, yeah, you can Google my name, and you can find it in Google, or just go to Amazon and type in my name, Chris Pilier, and you'll find this book. And I'm actually in the process of going to start doing a second edition of this because there's so much more that I've learned and so much more that I can add to this, some color. And Trey and I will be getting together, making sure that we get a good, valuable product with a lot more information to expand on this. And so what I want to do, I want to bring on Trey and kind of get into a little more of this the lawlessness discussion, and then see where we go from there. How you doing, Trey?
I'm very good. Glad to be here.
Man, thank you for joining me. And we were kind of talking about some pretty cool stuff last night. One of the things that Rob and I had talked about was this idea of the internet being this free market that's kind of opened up all these avenues for people to share information, share ideas, and really more or less expose not only some of the rights and the wrongs, but also expose the lawlessness that we're seeing. And I wanted to get your take on that and see what you think as far as what's taking place in this country right now.
Well, I think back to two things. One, I go back to Thomas Sowell back in, I think it was let's see here, March of this year, just coming off of some things with the Obamacare, I think Supreme Court decision, and he wrote something for townhall.com in one of his columns, and he said the unfolding disaster of Obamacare is only the most visible symptom of a far deeper danger from a lawless administration in Washington that unilaterally changes laws passed by Congress. President Obama has nearly 3 more years to continue doing irreparable damage to the fundamental basis of American government and America's freedom. Only Republican control of the Senate can rein in the lawless Obama administration, which can otherwise load up the federal courts with lawless judges who will be dismantling the rule of law and destroying the rights of people for decades after Barack Obama himself is long gone from the White House. Once that happens, even a future Republican majority led by people with the kind of ideological purity that the Republican dissidents want cannot undo the damage. And I think that was in March, and that was before amnesty. Yesterday I was on Fox locally, and that was the main point that I made with the Fox reporter when she was talking about what the president was going to do tonight. And I told her, I said, the great irony is here's the man, the person in charge of the executive branch of our government, which under our Constitution, his singular job is to enforce the laws. And as the chief law enforcer, he's choosing to ignore existing law, and he's rewarding lawbreakers. And I said, that is a huge irony. And I think one of the things the Bible talks about in 1 John 3 verse 4, it says, everyone who makes a practice of sinning also practices lawlessness, and because sin is lawlessness. And you think about the people, all people are sinners. I'm not trying to get into the philosophical debate of some are and some aren't. Everybody, Romans tells us all people have sinned. But people who really embrace sin and living a sinful life and practice a sinful life, not people who are trying to do right, trying not to sin, do the right things. It's amazing to me when you take a step back and you look at everything, these are the very people who are grossly supportive and engaged with this administration at a greater time than ever. I mean, there were Democrats who jumped off the bandwagon of Bill Clinton back in the day.
Right.
Even they said with Bill Clinton, they were like, oh well, hey, you cheated on your wife, and hey, but they didn't embrace it like, yeah, I'm glad he was up there doing that to enter. You never heard that just 10, 15 years ago. But now you have people who are calling for the president to be more and more lawless. And it's not just recently. When you go back and listen to the president's statements over the last 6 years, how many times did he say, with a chuckle, hey guys, listen, I know you want me to do things that I can't do. I don't have the power. It's not how our democracy works. This isn't how we do it. Over and over and he would do it with a chuckle like, I know, I want to do it too. But we've seen that his administration has in fact done it, and we don't have a court that will step up and say and slap down the executive branch with a check and a balance and say, you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. Look, we gave the two of the most historic elections in American history, the midterms after his first election and this recent midterm. Both of those were historic elections. And patched in between there during his second campaign for re-election, he used lawlessness to intimidate, suppress, hide information between the IRS, Benghazi, what he did to Tea Party and conservative groups. So you had corruption at its highest in between two of the most, and still with the two most historic swing votes and the power that the people gave to a particular party with a mandate, still it doesn't make a difference. We don't have anyone that will step up and check this president and say, you don't do this anymore. It's amazing.
And I think I want to kind of touch on 2 points. One, I think it's very important we can quickly mention here is that what you're saying is the most powerful branch of the government right now, lawless, and we can talk about the lawlessness aspect of it, but is the executive branch, and is never meant to be that way. The executive branch was simply after our discussion, after our debate, after our laws have been created, the executive branch is to execute those laws. So while that person does enact the most direct form of force in order to, and that's what government is. It's force. Okay, it's a necessary evil to enact the laws and to uphold the laws. That wasn't intended to be, the first or the most powerful power. The Congress has abdicated so much power to the executive branch, and not just to the president. We must make sure we mention this. He's given it to, or we've given it to, is really what's happened to the EPA, to the Department of Education, to the IRS, to all these different agencies that make up the executive branch. And the executive branch is no longer simply executing laws. They're also legislating. We can call them all cute little terms like regulation or rules or whatever, guidelines. I mean, when you tell me that I have to make sure that I dump my oil in a certain place in a certain container at a certain time at a certain place, and make sure that I use a certain toilet so that I don't have too much water, or that I have to buy a certain light bulb, and those laws, really what they are created by the executive branch. That's not the way it was intended to be. So,
and Chris, what are you going to do when it's created by people that you can't kick out of office because of a vote? What are you going to do when unelected bureaucrats, or what the Democrats are now calling technocrats, what are you going to do when these are the people who are making the rules that govern your life? And on top of that, you addressed liberals and progressives a few minutes ago. I would simply ask them this: what are you going to do in 2016 when President Cruz comes in and says, you know what, we need to do tax reform. We need to have, I don't agree with our current tax regulations. I know it's 30, 37, 49%, whatever it is, but I think we need to do a flat tax. In fact, you bring in 15, you send in 15% of your income across the board, everyone in America. I'm implementing by executive order a 15% flat tax, and that's all we're going to enforce. If you don't pay your 37%, we're not going to enforce that law anyway. What are you going to do, liberals? What are you going to do when you're going to argue he doesn't have the authority to do it? Well, you know what? That argument isn't going to hold water because you're not making the argument now.
Exactly. And look, I want to mention a comment here that Peter made. He says in Facebook. He says, keyword Trey used, fundamental. Okay, he said Obama's worldview sees that the American foundation and that which grew out of it as intrinsically wrong or flawed. Therefore, using the system to correct the system doesn't make any sense to the president. That doesn't make any sense to the president. So basically, what he's saying here, I think, and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, if you want to chime in again, is that the president doesn't like something, so he's utilizing the powers of the executive branch to create regulation and things like that in order to make the government in civil society more in his reflection, and that is a despotic view. And I've done this, I think, in the last 3 podcasts, but it's so rich, is that Montesquieu said that this was going to take place, and let's see here if I can find it without tying up a bunch of dead space. Here it is. So Montesquieu said, when the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person or in the same body of magistrates, there can be no liberty, because apprehensions may answer lest the same monarch or senate should enact tyrannical laws to execute them in a tyrannical manner. So what Peter's saying here in the text is exactly right. What a despot is somebody that wants to mold society in his image. We see Mao pictures all over in China. It's Mao's society. It's not the Chinese society. Now, don't want to get way off in left field or right field, if you want to, depending on how you want to look at it, in saying that we have this tyrannical dictator. But what the actions are taking place by the president and the executive branch are, in fact, tyrannical, because you're taking legislative and executive actions in the same body of magistrates. It's really what it is. So, but I want to go back to a comment you made, Trey, earlier, because I think this is really important to mention, and I think it will kind of segue into our conversation about value, which we're going to have after our little second break here. But you mentioned that the Bible says that we're all sinners, And if we take that out of the biblical context, the same rule applies in the secular world, if you want to look at it, is that we are not perfect. All of us are imperfect. We all have desires. We all have wishes. We all have things that we want and may not do the right things in order to get them. We are flawed as human beings. And the idea that we're all sinners or we're all flawed, they work upon the same framework. And in order to prevent those flaws from infringing on the rights of others, we have to enact laws. So I know that I have conversations with libertarians and I would argue anarchists that believe that we can have no government or very small government. And the small government I can lean on. And the reason why we have to have that is because the fact that we are flawed. We're not a nation or a world of angelic people that are not flawed. So we have to protect the rights. And that's the fundamental purpose of the federal government, is to protect the rights of others. And those powers are enumerated by the Constitution. In other words, we limit the government so it can't flip the powers on top of itself and enact powers and do things on our behalf benevolently, right? So what I want to do, I want to take a break and we're going to come back and I want to talk a little bit about value, because I think value is, if we can take this conversation from just a principle government-oriented discussion to an economical discussion, and we can tie it into the lawlessness, we can tie it into all these things and show how the socialist system that's being installed in this country, that's actually been being installed for almost 100 years now, is undermining the value of the American way and the American people. And if we want to get back to the America we used to be, this, I think, is the key. So we'll be back here in a minute. Thank you for joining me on the Battlefield of Ideas, and Trey Robert there on the Battlefield of Ideas as well.
No single person can train all the math and science teachers we'll need to equip our children for the future, or build the roads and networks and research labs that will bring new jobs and businesses to our shores. Now, more than ever, we must do these things together as one nation and one people.
Would anybody agree that there's one person that can teach all students? No. There's no one out there that's going to agree with that. There's nothing that we can do to guarantee that every hardworking American in this country is successful. Nothing. It is impossible. Just as it's impossible to put their hands on every head in this country, it's impossible to make them successful. It's impossible to make them do what it will take to be successful, and it is impossible to provide the virtue that will make them successful. That is for us to find within ourselves, not for government to provide. Period. There's no public policy that can be created by the greatest minds in the world that can give and provide every person in this country with the ability to succeed. That is utopian. That is insane. And what's sad is there's so many people that believe that this man can, within his hands, make that type of difference. That is scary. It's impossible. It's hard enough for me to get my son to be successful. He's acting as a parent here to 300 some odd million people. And as if he can build some kind of system with schools and roads and bridges that can provide success to all of us. But you need to twist your mind a little bit in order to understand the words of a statist. because success to him can be rewarded by him, because he can take money from the rich and give to the poor, and that is the virtue that is needed. Working for something requires labor and sacrifice, and not all of us succeed with that. We don't all succeed, and those that do succeed, it's because our efforts are recognized by the so-called collective. The people determine what's successful and what's not.
Arena Radio.
Check out Arena Radio on lanternsofliberty.us. Welcome back to Arena Radio, the battlefield of ideas. My name is Chris Puglier with lanternsofliberty.us and the battlefieldofideas.com. Going to jump right back into this discussion about lawlessness, the law, as well as value, which we'll talk about here just in a moment. But I wanted to read something here, and I think this is, you may have heard this before. Hopefully you've heard it before. But it really does, it does crystallize what we as Americans are all about. You may have heard it before, and I think it defines the purpose of the United States. It is the purpose of the United States, and the Constitution is to protect that purpose. So what is the purpose? And I'm just going to read the very, very beginning of it. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that there should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them, or among these, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we are all equal as we are created. And we're equal at creation. That's really what this boils down to. We are all created equal. It doesn't mean that we all have been created with equal things, or have all been created with equal abilities. Those are things after creation that we must work amongst ourselves in order to create something. And that something is of value. We have to protect value and values. And there's a big word there. We talked about law and lawlessness and how broad that discussion is. So we're going to open the door here and take a peek into the idea of value, the principle of value. So we're all equal, right, at creation? And some of us are born within a very prosperous society. It can be a prosperous society. But it's for us as individuals to make the most out of life. And that is where the virtue is what we do with what we're given. And by doing that, we create value. Now, we often talk about the relativity of poverty, the relativity of the rich, and what is rich. You know, and you can say that Bill Gates is rich compared to me, but I'm rich compared to someone in South America. And someone in South America may be rich compared to someone in Africa. It's all relative. But what we do with what we're given, the resources that we have available to us, is where the value and the virtue lies. So what is value? I'm going to read a couple definitions here. I love to do this because I think it's important to lay down the groundwork and the foundation of what words mean, specifically when we're discussing and opening the door and peering into a specific idea about something like value. So a fair return or equivalent in goods, services, or money for something exchanged. So it's a fair return. Now we talk about fair. Fair is relative. Something that's fair to me may be different from what's fair to you. And that's the idea of the market. The market is free when it is free. It allows us to determine for ourselves what something is worth. The fair value to me for something like let's say this iPhone might be $250. That may be the fair value. Someone else may love Apple so much that they'd be willing to spend $350 for it. So those decisions that we make are based off of what we determine as fair value. Someone may hate Apple and not buy this thing for $2, and that's fine. So the virtue lies within Apple's ability to determine or to show us the value in their product. Okay, so let's step back a sec and go back and read another definition of value. Relative worth, utility, and importance. So we look at things and we determine what's important to us. Some people like jazz music. Some people like rock music. Some people like gospel music. We value those things all differently. And that's in our nature because we're all individuals. So when people try to control the perception of value through force, then it undermines virtue. Because now I can create the best product in the world, and if I'm not connected to the right people politically, my product will not be fairly presented to the public, and there undermines my virtue. So what do you mean there, Chris? Like, bring this down to life terms. Well, if General Electric cannot make a light bulb that is cheap, that is good in quality, and available, then someone else ought to be able to come in and do that. But if General Electric can go to the federal government and say, you know what? That incandescent light bulb that I can no longer afford to compete with my competitors, we should probably ban that. So that way people can buy more expensive light bulbs. So it distorts, the government distorts value. So when we talk about the laws and lawfulness and the functions of government, that the powers of government are enumerated, and the fact that the government is supposed to protect our liberties, protect our rights, and they're not supposed to actively do things for us. They're not supposed to make decisions for us. And the reason why, this is fundamental, the reason why is because it undermines virtue and value. And you can look at it in monetary terms. When the federal government interferes with the supply of money, it undermines the value of a dollar. So the federal government, the people involved in the federal government, do not have the ability and the political will to raise taxes in order to pay for things that they're spending money on. They decide to print money. They're using force to force money into the market in order to take that newly printed money to pay off the debt, which is what we call quantitative easing. They're undermining the value of the dollar. This fundamental of value, or principle of value, spreads across everything that we know. And if you understand the nature of the word value, what that means, and what it means to us as individuals, I think we can find the problems that we have in the country. So let's explore that a little bit. So let's say that the federal government and the people in the federal government decide that they want to do things for us. Okay. Now remember, and I want to step back before I dig too far into this because I want to mention this once again. I mentioned it earlier. Is that our labor, the things that we do in order to acquire wealth, to acquire property, to acquire value. That value may be a book that we learn from. It doesn't necessarily have to have a monetary application. It doesn't have to have monetary value. It can just simply be a value to us. You know, it may be a vacation that we actually get to see something of that and that we value. And experiences of it could have value. So, we work. We get paid money for the work that we do. We take that money, which represents our labor, and we purchase something with it. And that property that we purchase with it, or that experience or that value, becomes us. Now remember, and we can break this into the relative discussion, what I get paid and what someone else gets paid is based on a contract. It may be just a simple social contract where I worked with my employer to determine what I'm worth and what's my value. So he pays me what I'm worth. I'm a human resource to him. I am working on his behalf to do his bidding, and he's paying me in return. Understanding those relationships is really where the fundamental principles of a free market exist. So when we try to force my employer to pay me a certain value, it's undermining value. It undermines my value. It distorts my value because then I believe I'm worth more than what I am. If I'm a young and upcoming worker coming right out of school, I hate to use the word worker, but go ahead. I'll play along. Coming out of school and I decide to go work at McDonald's, and that employer says, hey, you know what, I'm going to have to pay you $15 an hour because that's what the government's on. I'm worth $15 an hour. Are you? Do you perform in a way that promotes $15 of value to the customer or the employer? So undermining that value undermines the stability of the market. Let's look this in another direction. Let's say that we have a stock, okay? And basically a stock has a price, has a value, right? That price goes up and down what people are willing to pay and invest in that company's price. So let's say the stock price is $15 a share. The shares, which makes up the float of the company. I don't want to get into too much in the weeds there, but each share is owned by individuals that purchase and bid on that value. And the more people that buy it versus sell it, the price goes up of the stock. And the reason why is because that is a determiner of value. So as the price goes up, people can look at the market and there's an actual number that says that company is worth that, based on all of these people that are democratically, if you will, determining the value of that company. And if it goes down, then they could say, well, that company's value is not that good. So the stock market is simply a representation of value. So let's talk about the distortion of that value. Well, let's say, for instance, that Congress is about to pass a bill that's going to regulate light bulbs. And it's going to eliminate the competition of General Electric. And the congressman says, hey, honey, his wife, hey, we're about to regulate the heck out of these incandescent light bulbs. It's probably a good idea if you dump that company over there that has 90% of their market share in incandescent light bulbs, and you buy General Electric because they have a big market share of these curly, cute little, poisonous light bulbs. Then all of a sudden, the information that was shared between those two was what they call insider information. Now distorts the value of that stock because there's people privy to information that other people aren't privy to. It's not public. You call it about public trading, public information in the market. That's a distortion of value. Here's another distortion of value. When the government determines that something can be sold or can't be sold, and they regulate it, regardless of what people want and whether or not they value it. So they go in and distort that value. All right, so we talked about several different there, and the last one I want to talk about, this one I think we can all appreciate, especially as conservatives, because we often get caught in the conversations about welfare and how welfare is bad. But can we explain why it's bad? Because when we have discussions about this, it's a very sensitive topic. Because we all, as human beings, we do want to be compassionate and take care of others. But what is compassionate? Is undermining the value of something compassionate? Is undermining the virtue of the person we're giving welfare to compassionate? Is the $15 an hour worker that we talked about earlier, about taking him and making him think he's worth more than he really is that compassionate? Giving him a sense of entitlement. Where does the sense of entitlement come from? We always talk about it. We throw out the talking points. Oh, we live in an entitlement society. What does that mean? What does entitlement society mean? The reason why we have an entitlement society, and the reason why the entitlement society is growing larger and larger, is due to the distortion of value. It's that simple. Here's an example. We create this nice little program that allows people to go get housing and food and medicine for free. Well, what happens? Let me ask you this. If you give somebody something, if you have children, you know how this works. You give your child something and you wonder why the hell they broke it. And you're like, why did you break it? Well, it's very simple. It's in our nature. He didn't value it. Why? Because he didn't work for it. So when we give things like housing to people that need it, but we give them housing, we give them food, we give them all these things, and then we drive by their neighborhood and complain why they are not taking care of what we gave them. Why? It's because we've undermined value. They don't value that. They didn't have to work for the $800 a month that it costs to live in that place. They don't have to work for it, so they don't value it. If you gave me this iPhone and I was a young kid and I just lived off mom and dad, and I would take care of this iPhone, especially if I knew mom and dad were going to buy me another one. We talk about the entitlement society. Well, it's because we're entitled to a value that we believe that we're worth. You can see it in attitudes, and I'm not going to go into much detail about this, but you know what I'm talking about. People that think they're entitled to act a certain way. It's because it's psychological in nature. So people that institute this, they're not only undermining value, but they undermine the virtues of the people that they're providing this value. Let me explain. So we give a group of people a bunch of stuff. And we say, here, we're going to let you live in this building with this community. We're going to give you food. We're going to give you health care. We're going to give you all these things. We can give you phones. And then you need to go out and do something with your life. Are they going to do it? No. And we talked about earlier that the determining of value and what something's worth, and what specifically what we're worth, provides us with a sense of worth. It allows us to feel like we're important. That's so important. Psychologically, it's important. It's important for us to feel like we're worth something. And a lot of us, especially like dads work really, really hard because they want to provide value to their family. They want to support the values of their family. Not saying mothers don't do the same, but if we talk about the family as a unit, as the way that we see it traditionally, the mothers nurture the family in order to give it values and value. So it's more than monetary things. There's virtue involved. And when we undermine value, we undermine virtue. And the problem with our society and the lawlessness that we see is because we treat the people that we provide welfare to differently than we provide the people that work hard for a living. It's cruel to think about it, that these people don't work hard. I say these people being the people on welfare. And I'm not talking about just black people. There's a lot more white people on welfare than black people in a numerical aspect of it. So let's not try to get off in the weeds on the racist rant. These people being individuals that are on welfare, we've undermined their value. We have. And in the mind of being compassionate. You see, one of the things that I've learned from my fellow Christians is that Christians, when they go into a neighborhood and they share compassion, they provide food, they may provide shelter, they also provide value. Now, it may not be necessarily the value that everybody appreciates. And we can discuss that another day. But the fact is, they're trying to build up their virtue. And they're doing it the way that the Christians know how. By simply saying, don't be a sinner. Don't be a person that is void of integrity. Because then once you become an integral person in society, that you can go out and you can be prosperous and lift yourself up and prop up your own value. So value. If we understand value, when we look at things and problems, where is the value? Where are the values? So when we destroy life with abortion, what does that do to value? What does that do to values? I'm not talking about monetary aspects of it. Here's another discussion. People talk about, well, we need to control the population. Well, why do we need to control the population? Well, because it's getting out of control. Well, what controls the population? We can do like Hitler did, take people to gas chambers, sterilize people like we did in this country. We still have laws in the book that allow sterilization. We have abortion laws, contraception. You can argue the values in that. The point I'm trying to get is that if you allow the free market, if you allow value and virtue to prosper, people will make the correct decisions on what's right, including population control. All the garbage that we hear from the left and all these forceful mechanisms they wouldn't wish to put into place can be solved through simply allowing for freedom. There's evidence of what I'm talking about, population. Where is the population out of control for the most part around the world? In Africa, where there's the most despotism. It's because people value life. They value children. And if they don't have anything of value, including virtue, they will search for it every way they can. And that may mean making more children. Not saying that we shouldn't make more children, but we make decisions because in the United States, we do have more freedom, and we want to provide the most value and virtue to our children, and we know that if we have 20 of them, we can't provide as much to each one of them. So we make decisions, individual decisions, based on those things. Life is the most valuable. So when we see things that undermine the value of life, whether it's abortion, whether it's collectivizing people, taking people's rights away, we are destroying the most valuable thing known to man. And if you are a God-fearing person, the most valuable thing to God. So we're going to take a little quick break, and when we get back, I'm going to bring in Trey. I want to get his mind on what he thinks about this. And we'll close the show out. And I appreciate y'all for joining me. In the meantime, go to lanternsofliberty.us, thebattlefieldofIdeas.com. And also, if you go in our Hangouts area, there's a link there to our forum on Facebook. Get involved. These discussions happen every day. I'm the one that happens to get up and want to talk and let people hear about it. There's a lot of other very intelligent people out here that have these same discussions. So thank you for joining me. We'll be right back in a few minutes to finalize this conversation about law and value.
And the sacrifice zones of the pollution-based economy have to become the sacred zones in the new clean and green economy. Those communities that were locked out of the pollution-based economy and pushed down by the pollution-based economy need to be lifted up in the clean and green economy. Well, guess what? Renewable energy. Guess what? Solar industry. Guess what? Wind industry. They now own and control 80% of the renewable energy resources. No more broken treaties. No more broken treaties. Give them the wealth. Give them the wealth. Give them the dignity. Give them the respect that they deserve. No justice on stolen land. We owe them a debt.
If you buy into that, all of a sudden, it's not about solar energy. It's more about giving the wealth to the people that we've bullied. It's about solving the problems of racism, of sexism, of religious intolerance, of war, of gross economic inequality. Understand? This is all Marxism. It's polemics. He talks about holding them down, and we need to bring them up. And he uses it in the context of the environment. It's a false dialectic. He's bringing you to, this man was the green czar in the White House under Barack Obama. Valerie Jarrett talked this guy up big time. This guy was set to do research and make policy so that Barack Obama could implement the plan. If you went to this conference, you probably were going there because of the green economy and green opportunity and all this stuff. And then you listen to him speak, and all of a sudden, it's all about the oppression of Indians and how we pushed them off their land. So if you didn't get that, I don't know what to tell you.
Arena Radio.
Check out Arena Radio on lanternsofliberty.us.
Spill the lies, we see the world through devil's eyes.
Welcome to Arena Radio, the battlefield of ideas. My name is Chris Pioye with lanternsofliberty.us and the battlefieldofideas.com. Thank you for keeping with us here. I think we've got a really good discussion going on with talking about value, talking about laws, and just to kind of zero back or come back and look at what we've talked about at the very beginning with Ferguson, and we talked about the lawlessness on the border. The idea of value is being undermined. And a lot of that value is being undermined through the lawlessness that's taken place by citizens, by corporations, and by the federal government and the people that represent us. And in order for us to correct the ship, we have to address that lawlessness and that distortion of value. And that requires reduction of government. It requires local and state, reductions, as well as addressing the true nature of government, and us as individuals in our families, looking at us as individuals inside of ourselves and say, are what we're doing, is it virtuous? Is it promoting a civil society? So, with that being said, I want to bring in Trey Roberts here and get his perspective. Trey, what do you think about what I was talking about as far as value?
Well, a couple of things. And right as you were talking about it in the chat room, Pete made a comment that I agree with, and that's when you talk about value, you're talking about an aspect of a person's particular worldview. If you have a secular humanist or an atheistic or a nihilistic worldview,
Mhm.
value is going to be based off of almost purely and directly how it affects you and you alone in a very selfish, greedy standpoint, not a self-interested, greater good standpoint. As opposed to if you have more of a biblical Christian worldview, or you have a healthy theistic worldview, you believe that your value inherently comes in the view of the Creator, and that the fact that He created you, so there is a greater value than even you can see or understand, and life becomes, seeking that purpose or finding that purpose in life. What is that ultimate value? So I think, when you talk about, there's a group of people out there that have a more Marxist worldview that deny the existence of anything from a spiritual standpoint, and they only see things, and value to them is power, because power is the only place where decision can be made, influence can be made, things can quote unquote get done. Now you brought up a couple of things, and I want to kind of piggyback to way back at the beginning of the Obamacare debate. Zeke Emanuel came out and he was talking about his complete live system. This was one of the first times, as you probably well remember, where we kind of stepped back and said, my God, are you serious? People really believe that, if you're really young, you don't deserve the investment of the public, and if you're really old or really sick, well then, hey, we've already invested enough in you, so there's this sweet spot of society where people are useful for the greater good, for the collective, if you will, and they are the only ones who deserve any kind of investment, from healthcare to education or whatever it may be.
Right, controlling value is what they're trying to do.
Controlling value. And then Zeke Emanuel came back just last month with his whole, basically, we need to get used to the idea that most people are probably going to want to start checking out at 75. And so this wasn't just some kook at the beginning of this debate, and conservatives were trying to gin up an argument to scare people. Now that it's law, he followed up and made the circuit again and said 75 is basically the new 50, so or I should say 50 is the new 75. And as far as welfare, if people think about it, and I put a link in the chat room that people can go and read this article, but the article is from the Mises Institute, and it talks about a lot of people don't even know what was welfare before there was ever welfare. Because a lot of people today, they would think, well, man, if we just did away with the welfare state, there'd be chaos and rioting in the streets, and there'd be nobody to be able to do anything. Well, how did we help poor people and people in need of help before? And what was amazing was there was a great stigma even into the 1900s, the early 1900s. There was a big stigma behind taking government aid or taking government charity or even private charity in the late 18th and 19th centuries. Mutual aid, however, it didn't carry the same stigma because it was based on reciprocity, that today's mutual aid recipient might be tomorrow's or could be tomorrow's donor, and vice versa. So mutual aid was popular. See, we pass Fraternal Order of the Moose, Lions Clubs. We pass these lodges and these halls, and we don't know their history, but we're talking about these fraternal organizations, or what they call fraternalism. This is where employers and groups of people receive the majority of their benefits. One example was you had by the 1920s, at least 1 out of every 3 males was a member of a mutual aid society. Members of societies carried over $9 billion worth of life insurance in 1920. And you had these lodges, they dominated healthcare facilities. there was a particular hospital. Um, I mean, and this crossed, by the way, this crossed all demographics and all sectors. You had a large number of African American societies and fraternal organizations that actually created their own hospitals. In the early 20th century, it was not a given that an African American would be admitted into many hospitals, and if they were, they frequently had to face a lot of indignities and so on and so forth. But you had groups like the Knights and Daughters of Tabor in Mississippi. This was a black fraternal society with a reach across only a few counties, and they opened the Taborian Hospital in 1942, in which case membership to the Knights and Daughters of Tabor in Mississippi nearly doubled in 3 years to 47,000 people. So people don't even realize mutual aid societies founded 71 orphanages between 1890 and 1922, and almost all without a single government subsidy. And you know, the largest that most people, they don't even realize, was called Moose Heart, and that's founded by the Loyal Order of the Moose in 1913. So check out this article. The biggest blow to fraternalism, or mutual aid, which is what we had before we created the social welfare state. And when you jumped into economics, when you took this conversation into an economic path, socialism being the economic choice or the economic model of the worldview of Marxism or secular humanism, socialism and the social welfare state use the government apparatus to take from those that have to give to those that have not, or as Marx said, to each according to his need, from each according to their ability, and try to level the playing field economically, because it's one of the things that you need to engineer society with. But
Right.
it's all a redistribution of income. And we see the first major blow to any type of mutual aid society was when the AMA, the American Medical Association, back in 1912, took total control of the licensing of medical schools.
Right.
That was at the beginning, right at the height of the progressive movement. They knew better, and they took over education, because they knew through education they would be able to infiltrate all aspects of our society and control value on
Exactly.
every level throughout our entire culture.
Yeah, and look, that's some great stuff there. Let me expand on this a little bit, because I think that you hit on some very, very good points. The two things I want to address, the first thing second, which was you said about the secular worldview versus the biblical worldview. But while we're on the topic you're talking about, I think it's extremely relevant to discuss this here, because if we dig down below the surface of what you're talking about all these different fraternal organizations that utilized their own virtue and value in order to provide virtue and value to the community, and instead we've now seen a shift over the last 100 years to the government providing that. One of the things that is void, and it's actually looked down upon, and actually, hell, it's outlawed for the most part in the government side of this, is the spiritual aspect of it. And if we understand, when you talked about the Marxist view, the Marxist worldview, the government only can provide material material wealth. It can only provide money. It can only provide things, assets, things like that. But when you have a fraternal organization, okay, or you have a church that goes into the community and works with these people and builds relationships, they're building more than just material wealth. They're doing more than just giving $1 to someone when they drive down the road and they see somebody stand on the road to give them $1. They're actually taking them in and talking to them and building community, building value, building the relationship, which is valuable. So the material aspect of this is starting to really take over and enshroud the country, or the world for that matter, in this kind of soulless charity. And it's not charity; it's soulless wealth redistribution, and just the idea that the government takes from us to give to somebody else, and we call it theft. Okay, and by its nature it is. But by taking and giving, it's taking away the virtue for us to decide to give. and it totally takes the value out of society. So it goes so far out into different areas when the government, the socialist aspect of this takes place.
Chris, can I edify something you're saying?
Sure.
Take a look at this real quick. I want to show you. I'm going to try to do a screen share real quick. Whoa, that ain't it.
Like a green arrow in the upper left hand corner.
Which one do I do? I do the Google Hangouts. Is that the one I do? And hit share?
You should see. Do you see a video?
I think it's doing it. Okay, here's what I want. Tell me what you see, Chris, in a second here. I'm going to pull this up. Okay, do you see this?
No, just a black screen.
Oh. Okay.
Let me see if I can present to everyone. No.
Now, I have on my Facebook page. You've been talking about values, and I'm sitting here looking at it the whole time and didn't even realize. But if you look at, and in some way I can get you this picture. I don't know how to get it to you. I'm gonna stop sharing so that you get control of it again. But in this particular picture, it shows, and I may be able to pull it up on my phone and show you in the camera. But it shows it's a set of concentric circles that start from the inside and work its way out. And when you're working your way out of the circles, it starts from worldview and it goes out to the culture.
Can you got me a link?
Probably not, but I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do this.
Okay, I can kind of, yeah, I see I see a big circle and a circle in the middle.
Is it kind of shiny? Oh, here we go.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so you got the worldview in the middle, the values in the next circle, behavior, and then culture.
So if you think about how this is affected or how this really works, we're talking about the worldview as it controls value. So you've spent this entire show talking about lawlessness and value, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what controls that? The reason that value is so controlled or so debated is because what's the first thing that values control? Values control the behavior of individuals. If you can increase and control the value, you can control enough people that you can guide the culture.
Right.
But you have to, if you want to understand why someone values what they value, you have to dig deeper, as we've tried to do here today. You have to dig deeper and say, where is their, or what is their worldview? Where are they coming from? If they're coming from a place in their worldview, that is, life is not valuable because life is meaningless, then they're going to be, what are the behaviors that are going to be promoted or accepted? They're going to be lascivious. They're going to be murder, rape, pillage, all sorts of inhumanities.
Right.
And what does our culture look like? So when we look at these things, they all are related together, because I think we've done a really good job today for anybody who's been listening or watching. The values determine people's behaviors, but it's the worldview of a person that determines their values. So we have to go both, where is this leading to, but also where is this coming from? And that makes this entire discussion incredibly complex.
Yes.
And it must stay under the microscope at all times.
Exactly. And man, and there's so much out there, and there's so many ways to look at this, and I think that you've found a very, very good way to put on the imagery, because I think that chart, I'd like you to actually post that inside of Lanterns of Liberty in our Battlefield of Ideas forum on Facebook, and maybe we can get a discussion that's going on there to to discuss the worldview aspect of this, because and what I was trying to portray, and maybe not doing it in the way that image was shown, was that we as Americans lived in a biblical worldview for so long, and the progressive era has worked its way into society and has tried to subvert that worldview and change that worldview to an Eastern European or just an Eastern worldview, not a Western worldview. And granted, when we talk about biblical worldview, it's simply that if we look at it as a large, how all the philosophy that goes in with that, and even science, which I'm actually doing a lot of research right now that backs up this idea that there is a greater thing than us that exists out there. We call it God. Something that has created us. And when we look at the world in that way, or as Trey has communicated here, as a worldview, when our worldview is that we're all individuals and that we all operate individually, in order to make society better, we have to be prosperous in virtue, and we have to promote our values in order to have good behavior, to prevent crime by operating under the worldview and also have values. And then as we do that and our behavior becomes good, then our culture becomes good. The American culture, why it is so important is because for such a long time we have provided a beautiful, prosperous culture. We've had our problems and our issues, and history has shown that we've had some indiscretion. But the worldview aspect of this has to be understood. So when we have an immigration problem and we're bringing people from other worldviews into the culture, eventually it undermines the values, the behaviors, and the culture ultimately. Cultural Marxism. We talk about cultural Marxism. We look at the Frankfurt Marxists. If we look at the Fabian socialists, their way of changing America to a Marxist worldview was to undermine the culture, talk about the behaviors of people. They worked backwards into the worldview. So they showed a different culture. They wanted us to embrace multiculturalism in order for us to abandon American culture for this other foreign culture that supposedly embraces intolerance. But in order to do that, it has to be intolerant of the American culture. It embraces bad behavior, whether it's promiscuity, whether it's homosexuality, whether it's all these different things, and change the labels on them to make them where they're not any longer bad behavior, that they're acceptable behavior. And we have to be tolerant of these other things. We have to be tolerant of people that kill because, well, they've had a hard life. And we have to understand them and try to somehow compartmentalize people into these different blocks and dig down into their brain and say that they are acting this way because of this experience and these people are acting this way because of this experience. And then go a little further and redefine our values by saying that, well, capitalism is wrong because it's selfish. And the idea of individual liberty, the idea of individual self-interest is simply selfishness and unfair. And eventually, as we do that, they will change the root, the core of the former biblical worldview to a Marxist, materialistic worldview that rejects any type of spirituality. So the worldview is the soul in us, in our culture. It's our soul. And as it's ripped out and something else is replaced, it's empty. Because there isn't nothing, and there is nothing in the worldview. In fact, of Marxism. In fact, Marxism is a nihilistic point of view, a worldview. If you don't understand nihilism, which we've talked about before, nihilism is the belief in nothing. You can call it atheism or agnosticism if you want to talk about it in a religious aspect of it or faith aspect. But the Marxist worldview is empty. It is soulless. Nihilism is soulless. Stealing from one people to give to another, looking at things in relativity versus within absolutes, lawlessness, there's nothing there. There's no foundation. It's just chaos. So I hope you've enjoyed this. And I'd love to hear more from you all. On Facebook, Trey, I'm hoping he's going to post those items there, and if not, I will, so we can get a discussion about worldviews. What's the importance of a worldview?
Already there, bro.
Thank you, man. Look, I want to thank Trey for joining me, and also thank Pete for commenting here. I think we really kind of dug into some good information here. Please go to lanternsofliberty.us, thebattlefieldofIdeas.com. Also purchase the book, The Machine, The Progression of Secular Socialism. And join us on Facebook. Let's have some open discussion. And I think if we can talk about this to a lot of people, and we can understand the worldview of America, we can change it back to the way it was. Thank you very much.
If it becomes wayward, who shall control it? If it becomes unjust, who shall trust it? As sentinels of the country's watchtower, I beseech you to watch and guard with sleepless dread that corporation which can make all property and rights, all states and people, and all liberty and hope its playthings in an hour and its victims forever.